So it's October 14th, 1066. And as most of us know, this is the date of the Battle of Hastings. So imagine you're there, and there's a hillside, no abbey there of course, which came after the battle. On going down from the ridge, it's sloping downwards, and to the right hand side there's marshy land. But then, at 9 o'clock, it's all settled for the battle. And there's Duke William of Normandy, known as the Bastard, who's lined his troops up. It's like facing the coast of France, seeing it from the English side. And on the left he's got the Bretons. In the middle there's the Normans, which he has commanded himself. And on the right flank is the Duke of Flanders, which is his father-in-law, and mercenaries. Facing him is Harold and his Anglo-Saxon army on top of the ridge in a shield wall. That is, the shields close together, overlapping each other. And this is a way of fighting that the Saxons had used for generations, also the Vikings. Around 9 o'clock in the morning, William gave the order to advance. But first, it was the archers, 2,000, and they let off their arrows. But they didn't quite reach it. It was a bit overextended, and most of them fell harmlessly in front of the army, or they were parried by the shields. So, and no arrows were coming back. So, I mean, it was strange that Harold hardly had any archers whatsoever. Maybe they were coming down in the reinforcements. We'll never know. But the archers fell back, and he was ordered the infantry up the slope. It wasn't too steep, but steep enough, and on they went. The Saxons were hitting their shields with their axes or their swords and their spears, and were shouting, "Oot! Oot! Oot!" or "God mitts! God mitts! God mitts!" with God. And I wouldn't have liked to be one of those Norman infantry advancing up the hill. And then they let loose a barrage of missiles, spears, hand axes, knives, daggers, you name it. Whatever they could throw at this Norman infantry coming up, they did. And it stopped them in their tracks, and they fled back down the hill. And of course, William was pretty angry about this. Now, meanwhile, with the Saxon line, I must mention this, that Harold told his men, because there were very few of them, maybe 7,000, waiting for the reinforcement, which he was promised, that on no account leave their position. Do not leave your position. Stand firm. And, he was speaking mainly to the field that they're going to take the brunt of whatever missiles are coming over the top. At the front were his housecarls, his elite troops, and his thanehood, his knighthood, his earls and landowners, fighting men, trained to fight. So the third advance was an all-out attack by the cavalry, with William leading the Normans at the centre. Up they went, and it was, the noise with the clarions and the screaming and the shouting and the clash of steel against wood and wood splintering and the cries of men dying. Horrific, absolutely horrific. And they could make no headway whatsoever. The shield wall stood firm, and they looked up and my God, they trembled. Meanwhile, on the left flank, the Bretons, equally fighting just as a desperate battle, could take no more, and fled down the hill, really just to get away. They were fleeing. And the Saxons on that side, who after taking 2 or 3 hours of, constant warfare and missiles and seeing their friends wounded or killed beside them, couldn't hold the line and fled after the pursued the Bretons down to the bottom of the slope. Now William very quickly saw this, and he realised that if they all retreat, well, Harold could come down with his army and they'd be done for. So he wheeled his cavalry round and outflanked the Saxons. And some of them, so the story goes, some of the Saxons found this sort of hillock, and there they sort of held out desperately, but they were cut down to the man, and at least 1,000 men died in that encounter. But now it was reaching lunchtime. Both sides were pretty exhausted, but the shield wall was holding firm. No reinforcements were coming yet. Now Harold wanted to go to the front because he was standing at the back, like supervising the battle. And beside him he had a flag that was made by his mother and his sisters, and the flag was the flag of the fighting man, encrusted with jewellery, and it fluttered and shone. And on the other side was the flag of Wessex, the dragon of Wessex. But his brothers, Gareth, Leofwin, advised him, no, if we lose you, England is finished. You must remain alive. Gareth took Harold's shield, unbeknown to Harold, and took to the front. And in the next charge of the Normans, he singled out Duke William, unhorsed him. William fell heavily to the ground. Leofwin was raising his axe. Just as he did, William threw his spear and impaled him to the floor. It was the end of Gareth. Harold couldn't see this. It was pandemonium. William was on the floor again. The cry went up, the Duke is dead, the Duke is dead. And the Normans started to flee back. He grabbed a passing horse, jumped on it, lifted his helmet, and said, I'm here, I'm here. And he gathered all his knights and said, follow me. And with this, they would follow him anywhere. This is a great leader they're following, and a mercenary, brutal leader. And up the slope he went again. He was unhorsed again. Some say by the champion wrestler, Harold's own champion wrestler, who William killed also. But that's just a story. We don't know. They retired again. The battle's going on. It's been going on now. Well, it started at 9. This is now 4 o'clock. No side is letting up. Casualties are high on both sides. It's carnage. There are bodies everywhere. There's blood. There's dead horses. There's heads. There's legs. There's intestine. Everything all over the place. The smell. It was a hot day. A particularly hot day for October. But Harold knew that if he could hold out to 6 o'clock, when the sun goes down, he could retreat into the forest, the great weald of Kent behind him. And tomorrow is another day. The Normans had no chance coming into the forest. The day would be Harold's. And so, what they did, what William did, he gathered all his knights, all his men, and knew that this had to be the last charge. But before that, he got all his archers together, got them closer, pushed them closer, and told them to aim high, high in the air. And this they did. And a rain of arrows came down upon the Saxons. And many men died. And this is where Harold presumably got struck just above his left eye. And it was a very bad wound indeed. In fact, he fell. But he was looked after by his retainers and his physicians. And I'll have to stop there just a second. I have to drink. How's it going?
Great. Yeah, carry on. Yeah, drink your drink. I won't turn it off, but I'll just... Yes, I have your drink.
Meanwhile, when this was going on, his other brother was killed, Leofwin. And they brought him in, and he lay there as if asleep, with hardly any wounds visible. So there was just Harold left and his commanders, his marshals, and his loyal household, his housecarl, which in fact is his household, who was sworn to stay with their king, their bread giver, their Bretwalda, till death. William knew this. The sun is going down. William gathered his men and said, we must go for one target, and it's Harold Godwinson. He holds the army together. If he's dead, we've got a chance. And there's talk that he had 100 companions he gathered around him, his best knights. And there, the clarions called again. People, the Saxons were close together, closer and closer. They'd lost a lot of men, but the gaps were filled. Every time one fell, another filled his gap from behind. And some peasants found themselves in front now, fighting with the elite housecarl. But they too were armed with axes. And they stood firm. But there were not so many now. And William made this all-out effort. They rode up the slope, and he told his men to call out for Harold, the usurper, usurper, coward, coward. And so they did. And he knew Harold well. He knew him as a man. And Harold felt this would be a great insult. Too much pride, ego maybe, who knows, but who would take that? And so he drew him out, and a great roar, actually, not a cheer, it was a roar from both sides when Harold came to the front with his axe and began cleaving down whoever came near him. But William had done the job. He said, there, the companions, 100 companions, charge. And so they did. Maybe 10 got through. But by the time they'd got through, they'd broken through the housecarl, and there was Harold with his axe raising his axe. He was hit by a lance, a spear, by one of the companions. And then someone hacked at his thigh, and another hack at his leg. His right leg was hacked off, and he fell to the ground. But looked it up, and it was nearly dark. The sun was nearly down. But too late. The king was dead. His body was trampled on all over. The horses were everywhere. People were fleeing, whatever. And some of the housecarls began to chant the Battle of Morden. It's an old battle song. And it became dark. And they were still fighting in the dark. And the only way they knew who was Norman, who was Saxon, if you were not singing the Battle of Morden or chanting, you were the enemy. But it was the end. The end of Anglo-Saxon England.